Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. I'm really excited about this project I'm starting, which is a sampler quilt along with an old wedding dress I got at a thrift store for $25. And here you see I'm cutting some of the pretty trim off the bottom of the dress. For this block today, I'm not going to use any of that fancy trim, but I do want to preserve it for later on in my project. For block number 1 in this sampler quilt along, I am going to make block Thrifty. That's what it's called in Barbara Brackman's encyclopedia. It's on page 184 of the encyclopedia. It's a 3-color block, and here you see I'm using the white for the wedding dress. I'm actually not using that for the background. I'm using it for one of the colors. Then I've got a darker gray pattern print, and I've got a lighter gray pattern print. When you're cutting wedding dress fabric, now this fabric is 100% polyester, and it does kind of have some bias in it if you don't cut it on the grain. And unfortunately, because of the way a wedding dress is cut, a lot of what I'm going to be cutting may have some bias and may have some stretch. So just be very careful when you're cutting. Make sure the fabric underneath is not stretching. When you put it together with another piece of fabric, make sure it's not stretching. For this fabric, for one block, I would need 4.5-inch squares. So what I like to do is cut a 9x9 square, then I divide it horizontally and vertically to get 4.5-inch squares. Now I am making 2 of the exact same sampler block, so I am going to be cutting 8 4.5-inch squares out of this wedding dress fabric. For my lighter gray fabric, I need a 20-inch by 2.5-inch strip. For my dark fabric, I need a 20-inch by 2.5-inch strip, and I need one 4.5-inch square for each block. So step 1, I am going to put the dark gray with the light gray right sides together, these 2.5-inch strips, and I am going to stitch those together to make some 4 patches. I am going to press my strips open to the darker side. Now I am going to cut these strip sets into 2.5-inch widths. To make sure your cuts are straight, use a horizontal line on your ruler lined up with that seam you just stitched. And since I have an uneven edge on the left, I'm going to cut the first cut a little bit wider. Then I'm going to flip it around and trim it to 2.5 inches. To make one of these blocks, you'll need 8 of these little strips. I need 16 because I'm doing 2 blocks. Now to make our 4 patch, we take one of these little strips, a dark and a light, and we flip the other one that we're going to match it up to opposite. And since we press to the dark side, it's easy to nest the seam. The dark seam is going one way. On the other side, it's going the other way. We can just nest and press that into place with our fingers, stitch our 1/4 inch seam, and this block will be very, very close to 4.5 inches when we're done. With that done, I go ahead and press these 4 patches open. Now I go ahead and trim these. I know they're close to 4.5 inches, but I trim them anyway. What I'm looking for is that where the center meets, I need to line up on my ruler with the vertical 2 1/4 and the horizontal 2 1/4 to get a 4.5 inch square. You can see there's very little waste here. I did get very close to 4.5 inches on my finished block, but I like to make sure these edges are straight before I put them into the sampler block. With that, I'm going to lay out my 2 sampler blocks right on top of each other. My center block is the dark 4.5 inch square. Then around each side of that dark square, I'm putting my white wedding dress 4.5 inch squares. And then each corner is going to be one of the 4 patch blocks with the dark to the inside. Next, I will be stitching these together row by row, and then I'll join the rows together to finish the block. First, I'm taking the top row, the first 2 blocks, and I'm going to stitch those right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to chain piece, and next I'm going to take the second row, stitch those first 2 units right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm taking the first 2 units of the third row, stitching those right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam. Since I'm making 2 blocks, I am going to go ahead and chain those left 2 units for each row 1, row 2, and row 3. When I separate these units, you're going to see that I make sure and put row 3 into the row 3 spot, row 2 into the row 2 spot, and row 1 into the row 1 spot with that seam on the right-hand side. Now I'm going to use the same procedure I just did and add that right-hand block to each row. And again, when I separate these, I make sure and put them in the right spot. Now putting the rows together didn't require matching, but you can see I've got my clips here because when I put these rows together with the next row, I definitely want to match up and nest the seams where these little units join. And again, I am using the nesting technique to make one seam go one way, one seam go the other way. I place a clip to hold it in place till I can stitch my seam. So with row 1 and row 2 clipped together, I'm going to go ahead and clip on row 3 as well. This will make the stitching go a little bit faster for me. Now it's just a matter of stitching 1/4 inch seams to put this block together. Let's talk about pressing. When you're talking about a wedding dress or polyester, test, test, test. In my case, I am going to be using this thin piece of muslin fabric that I have, and I'm going to cover my block with that, and then I'm going to press this block on a setting of silk. That was hot enough to press, but not hot enough to mess up my polyester. I'd say block 1 of my sampler wedding dress quilt along is a success. I think it turned out beautifully. I just love it, and I can't wait to make block 2 in the series. If you choose that bell icon, you will get notified when I post new videos. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.